Hello, and thank you very, very much for joining in. A warm welcome to those who are joining in live, and hello to those who are watching the recording of this. So, this is part 2 of a series I'm going to be doing on preparing for Christmas based on the teachings of Bruno Groening. If you're new to Bruno Groening, I invite you to drop by my website, and I've posted that link. So it is August, at least at the time of the making of this video. Why on earth am I talking about Christmas in August? Well, Bruno Groening said that the Christmas season was a very, very special time. And so I'm making this for 2 reasons. One, to give myself some time to prepare and reflect on it, and also to let other people know about Bruno's teachings on it so that they have time to really think about how they might want to do Christmas differently. And as always, please don't believe anything I say, but find out for yourself if it's true. If I'm speaking of my own experience, I promise to tell the truth. If I'm reading something that Bruno wrote, I promise I'm reading the words directly. I'm not changing them. But in terms of the spiritual ideas we're going to be looking at, please don't, some people who come here respect me and respect what I do, and I appreciate that, but please don't take what I say as the truth, but find out for yourself. Because Bruno Groening, who was a master, and a spiritual master, that's what he asked of people. He said, he didn't ask people to blindly believe him. At a certain point, the spiritual path becomes about discernment, about listening inside yourself to determine what's true. Hi, forever loving everything. Welcome. So, let's distance ourselves from all worries, burdens, fears. The day. For some of you, it's the end of the day. For some of you, the beginning of the day. Here where I'm broadcasting from, it's the middle of the day. A lot's happened, and I have a few things planned for the future. But so let's put those things aside. And let's, of course, put aside anything we're worried about, anything that doesn't feel good. Put aside or place it into the hands of a helper such as Bruno, such as Christ. Or offer them over to God. And we need to use our will a little bit to do this. Bruno Groening said, pardon me if my pronunciation isn't so good. Maken si sich vrij van dem. And I'm not going to go on, but he goes on to say that you perceive as suffering. So I just want to, my studies of the German language are just beginning, but Machen can be translated Machen can be translated as free or empty yourself or emptying out or liberating or clearing. So Machen si means it's like a command. Like you, it'd be like if I said, you sit. So Machen si, it's an order. in essence. And not just really an instruction, but kind of a like, do it. So mak and si, seek. Seek means yourself. So literally, like it's you, like you free yourself. It's very strong, very, very strong language. And so as we separate ourselves from these negative things, we really need to engage our will. It can't, it can be, but I don't believe that's actually what Bruno meant. It's just like, oh, Bruno, here, have this. Oh, have that. Oh, have that. It's no, like, no, I don't want this. I give it away with firmness and fervor. Really? Really using our will. So let's do that now. Empty out, push it out, firmly give problems, burdens, worries to Bruno Groening, Christ, or to God. Any situation. That you don't feel good about. And then ask. Ask to receive the divine healing energy and observe your body having the will and intention to take that energy in. So we'll spend a little bit of time in silence doing that now. Hi, Luna. Thanks for saying hello. Well, I get to be a little humble, so pardon me. I made a mistake when sharing about the German. So again, I'll read it. Machen Sie sich frei. So machen means make. Pardon. Frei is empty, free, liberated. So really, it's this. If you translate it literally, it's like, "Hey, you, or you, make yourself free." It's that oomph that gets lost in English translation. So we really need to, according to Bruno, use our will. Or if I'm understanding this correctly, and I believe that I am, minus my little slip there. So, welcome everyone. I'm so grateful that everyone's here. This subject is very dear to me. When I found this speech 7 or 8 years ago, I forget which, and I was just enthralled. And I'm going to pick up where I left off last time. And one moment, I'm going to post a link for this speech. You're welcome to just listen. And we're in paragraph 13. And so just to pick up, I'm going to read we're in paragraph 14, but I'm going to read paragraph 13 because that gives some context. My dear friends, just consider the gift that God is giving us here, because human beings never listen to what's inside them, because human beings have come away from the divine guidance. They pay no attention to themselves or their bodies. They did not listen to what was inside them, and also did not follow their feeling, and also did not live in the will of God. So as I read this, I invite people to listen inside themselves. Yes, there's definitely intellectual content, but let that be second. And here's why. Here's what Bruno Groening said about the Bible, and I believe the same applies to his own teachings. This is from the book Powers of the Spirit, page 166. Read the Bible often and calmly, but do not stay stuck on the individual words themselves. Read more between the lines. Without any inner reserve, allow the meaning of the text to work on you, and you will suddenly know what it was like back then, what Jesus wanted to make clear with his parables and still wants to make clear today. The word that has been handed down to us all on its own is empty, but what one becomes aware of in oneself by means of it is alive. So I invite people to let something come alive in themselves from this text I'm going to be reading. I'm going to read maybe 2 pages, and then we'll go over it a little more deeply. And so, again, this is referring to people who didn't listen inside themselves. This is paragraph 14. And so they came completely away from the true divine guidance. And then they only lived in their beliefs. It's quite satisfactory the way our parents, our forebears, celebrated these festivals, fixed so hard and fast, without really giving it a thought, without ever becoming at all conscious of it. Nothing, not a trace of any of that. They simply lived in their belief. And I'll say it once again. It just had to be like that. My parents celebrated the festival that way. We celebrate it this way. And my children celebrate it this way too. My dear friends, that means in short that everything goes down the drain. There is nothing left at all that can still be called life. There is nothing left at all of everything that God has decreed for us. God has decided for us. And nothing at all remains of what the Savior means for us. There is no longer anything true, no longer anything credible among human beings. They took it only like this, and that was that once upon a time Christ was here once, and they don't believe that he is always with us. And they also don't believe that he can dwell in us and that we can actually be guided by him. That is, that God, through his Son, leads us to where we belong, to whom we belong. I know that people brush all this aside with certain carelessness. Briefly put, they simply cannot have faith anymore. Now, my dear friends, if you have not traced Christ's life for yourself, let's go right back to the beginning. That is, back to the birth of Christ. But we are reminded about that day so often every year. In fact, now, of course, we must understand what the birth of Christ means for us, what Christ is for us. I know well enough that human beings are living in the belief of which they say, my physical parents are what count for me. What they say to me carries the most weight. What the teaching of Christ says to me, says to them, only comes in second place. Yes, and my parents drone on about it. They say, you must go to church, we must pray, without ever once giving us a hint that we have to do this with all of our hearts. And that as we do this, we must hand over the heartfelt wish of ours so completely that we actually separate ourselves from all evil and receive here the good, the truly divine. And now, my dear friends, now follow the life of Christ further. What he has done for us, what he has given us on our journey through life, and how he knew how to guide us. All that he spoke from God, his Father, who at the same time is also our Father. And consider that we only have to obey him, and that he does only this, does it like this, and gives it to us here like this, as God gave it to him, as God expected it from him. Christ himself has given us much that is instructive, only we must really take Christ's words seriously as well. We must take them into us with all our hearts. We must say yes to all the good that he has given us on our journey through life. And we must then stand by this word, this one single word, yes. I know that human beings are careless. They say yes 100 times, and of those 100 times, they live up to this yes just once. And 99 times, not. And then they do not live in the belief that they owe themselves, above all, that they owe God an account of all of this. They simply say yes, they follow, and they have faith, and today they still do not know what faith is. And they still do not know what Christ means for us. And even now, they still do not know that we have to do nothing else but follow him. He has given us a great task for our lives. He brought us so much with he brought so much with him into our earthly lives that we ourselves, also regarded as individuals, have to put all of this into practice. This is our path, my dear friends, and no other. So I'm going to pause there. Let's take some time, take these words in, feel into them, and see what comes alive in you. Okay. So, how to celebrate Christmas? Bruno points out that we've been celebrating it out of habit. And by we, I mean individuals, but also the human race. Like, oh, this is how my parents did it. And he said, without ever becoming conscious of it. Without listening inside of ourselves and determining how to celebrate it that way. But the same thing applies to everything. Following along what our parents said, what society says, instead of following along what the voice or presence of God inside of us directs us to do. And here in the speech, Bruno talks about how that impacts life, that if we're not living in divine guidance, we're not really living, how that impacts how we celebrate Christmas. He talks about how this impacts how we do religion or do spirituality, of like, oh, I just go to church and pray. Whereas Bruno says, when you pray, you have to pour your heart. You have to pour your heart out, or with all your heart, with vigor. He once said, pleading is prayer. So to really plead, kind of like the translation I was trying to do. When we separate ourselves, it can't just be like, oh, Bruno, please take this. It's like, I give this away using real will and real intention. And when we just follow along what parents or culture says and don't listen from the inside out, Bruno Groening says there is no longer anything true, no longer anything credible amongst human beings. That we're all just kind of living in habit, as opposed to following this inner knowing, as opposed to following the teachings of Christ. And here again, he calls Jesus a savior. When I first read this, I was like, oh, what? It sounded religious to me. It wasn't easy for me to hear that. But then Bruno explains what he means by it. That Christ is always with us. That Christ can dwell in us. That we can actually be guided by Christ. And later on, he says that, Christ showed us the way. Well, he says it here, but later on he said that without the help of Christ, I believe we'll get to it in a little bit, but that most people had strayed so far from the good path that without Christ's help, they wouldn't have found their way back. And then Bruno says, I know well enough that human beings are living in the belief of which they say, my physical parents are what counts for me. What they say to me carries the most weight. What the teachings of Christ say to me, to them only comes in second place. And so here, I think, if I'm understanding this correctly, Bruno's being a little sarcastic, but it's not like most people walk around thinking, oh, what my parents say come in first and the teachings of Christ come in second. But if I'm understanding Bruno correctly here, the point is that most people follow their parents, and also I would add culture, but all those things that they've heard and put that in front of the teachings of Christ. And an interesting way to look at that is to look at how we have and how most people celebrate Christmas. And Bruno points out that it's really not the right way. And it's just something that's just been handed down. But it's been handed down as tradition. And so it's like, oh, we have to do it. And Bruno says when we live that way, when we live outside in, instead of inside out, and what I mean by inside out is listen to what's inside them, or what Bruno says about this. They did not listen to what was inside them, and they also did not follow their feeling, and also did not live in the will of God. So if we're living outside in, then we're just following our parents and culture, and we're not following that inner feeling, and we're not following the will of God. And hence Bruno quite drastically says, well, you're not actually living if you're doing that. He said, human beings must be under divine guidance. There is no life without it. And I thought that was the harshest thing I'd ever heard. What? The people who, and me as well, it's not like I've spent my whole life living in the will of God, following that inner feeling, that inner knowing. What? That means I wasn't alive? What? All the other people who are doing that, they're not alive? Well, Bruno didn't say they're not alive, but he said there is no life without it. So my understanding of that is they're not really living. Why? Because they're following things that they heard from their parents, and they're following culture. In essence, they're following kind of a program, or as Bruno calls it, the force of habit. And here, so what is, and then two other things in this section he kind of closes with, or not for this particular section. That we say yes to something, like a spiritual, for example, nothing is incurable. It's easy to say that, but then to stand by it. I know I'm certainly guilty of that, of being, yes, nothing's incurable. And then 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day later, falling back into, oh, is this ever going to heal? So Bruno really calls us to, again, with vigor and with will, stand by these spiritual truths. And here's this, and Bruno says, we know we have to do nothing else but follow him. And in this context, I'm going to back up. And they still do not know what Christ means for us. And even now, they still do not know we have to do nothing else but follow him. Follow him. We as individuals have to put all this into practice. This is our path, my dear friends, and no other. So what does it mean to follow Christ? Well, I think that's a profound and deep question, and it's an important question for anyone who's watching this or interested in Bruno's teachings on Christ. And very simply, what I believe it means is what Bruno said earlier, is to live from the inside out. Not the like, oh, I feel angry, so I'm going to tell this person off, tell someone off. From the deep core, that inner deep feeling, and be guided there. And if it feels right, to invite Christ into you, and to invite Christ to guide you. Bruno says both of these things are possible. So let's reflect on all this for a little bit. So I'm going to continue reading. Hi, Jisoo. In paragraph 23, I know that you will now say yes, but how is all this possible? I don't need to repeat the how again today. I have let you know so often what path we have to travel, what path we find ourselves on. For everyone must feel that for themselves. For many friends in our circle of friends have the good feeling that they really are people who take joy in life again and say yes to it. They have come to the conclusion that the life they were leading up till now was not the right one, and that they had never felt as good as they do now. When they hear true words and when they have taken these true words to heart, taken them to heart, taken them into themselves, and also done everything that they owe to themselves and to the people around them as well. Yes, my dear friends, and yet I have to keep on saying, let us just do everything that has been given to us here on our journey in life from God through Christ, our Savior. And I said just now that you have the pleasure of anticipating that you can give gifts to those closest to you, of expecting gifts yourself, earthly gifts, that is. But all that, my dear friends, is just nothing for us. We can also continue like this, but then you have forgotten the most important thing. And the most important thing is that God, our Father, also wants to give us a gift. For he once gave us so rich a gift. Again, I must say, he sent us a son, his son, and he worked through him. And through Christ, he showed us the way. He has given more, certainly, than just an earthly gift. This is also a personal gift. Naturally, God expects from us not just anything, but just this, that we also take this, his gift, into ourselves. And I ask you now, are you not in need of it? Or do you still not believe in the divine order? Or do you by any chance believe that disorder prevails even there with God? No, friends. If you do stand in need of the good, you can put your mind to rest. You don't need to pray to Groening for it or even worship him. Pray to God. But bring your heart's desire in this way before God himself and believe that this, your heart's desire, will also be fulfilled for you. Don't make big words about it. On the contrary, you don't need to say anything to those around you. You simply have to do it. And have faith in the good. I say it so often. Have faith in the good. That is, have faith in God, who has decreed only the good for us. For evil is around us and has to a large extent gained a foothold in human beings. That is, evil went to work in the human body. And they, the human beings themselves, had to realize this. Realize that this had become a great disorder. No one can deny that you all stand in real need of order, the order that God himself is. And here too, my dear friends, if you have this heart's desire, if you say yes to all that is good, and if you have faith that your heart's desire will be fulfilled for you, it will happen. Naturally, you must look for the fault in yourselves, not in the people around you. Don't always push it away from yourselves and say, yes, well, I am certainly not to blame. I'm not aware of any fault in me. He and he, or he and he did it. Oh no, friends, always look for the fault in yourself and be open and honest with yourselves. If you are not honest with yourself, every evil word you hear, whether you say yes to the evil word or not, or are too cowardly to tell the truth to this person, the one who said the evil word to you, or to confront him with the truth in any way, this already is a great sin. So where we picked up, the preceding portion was about Bruno saying, our path is nothing other but to follow Christ. That's our path. Okay, but what does that mean? Well, Bruno points out that he said it often, and it'll keep on saying it, that a huge part of it is trusting in God, in goodness. That a huge part of it is separating ourselves from evil. And also being very frank and honest when people say something evil, to point it out to them. Now, he says something very interesting that I am still personally meditating on. And now, like I said, this is year 7, maybe year 8, I'm not sure. Talking about how we can anticipate gifts from people, he said, but if we focus on that, then you have forgotten the most important thing. And the most important thing is that God, our Father, also wants to give us a gift. For he once gave us so rich a gift. Again, I must say, he sent us a son, his son, and he worked through him. And through Christ, he showed us the way. He has given more, certainly, than just an earthly gift. This is a personal gift. Naturally, God expects from us not just anything, but just this, that we take this, his gift, into ourselves. So, on the surface, Bruno is saying, well, God gave us a gift. Jesus Christ. That is maybe not so hard to take in. But then Bruno says that God expects us to take this gift into ourselves. Now, sort of in religious circles, you hear this all the time. Taking Jesus into your heart, accepting Jesus as your personal Savior. And while that may be pointing at the truth that Bruno is talking about, I don't know that I can say much more except that it feels related, yet maybe coming at it from a slightly different angle. But each person would really need to reflect on that and come to their own conclusion. And part of this path, I'd be so interested to know if Bruno ever used the German word for humility, because he talks about humility often. I don't think that he just sort of directly uses that word. But here he says, for evil is all around us and has to a large extent gained a foothold in human beings. And he says that people had to realize that this had become a great disorder. He also said, do you believe that you, let's see, I ask you now, are you not in need of it? Meaning divine order, well, not just divine order, but are we not in need of the gift of Christ? And Bruno points out that no one can deny that you all stand in real need of order, that we all have this spiritual need for help. And that's part of what humility is recognizing that we need help. And part of this path is about honesty. Bruno talks about finding the faults within ourselves, being honest with ourselves. He would call people to self-reflection and self-knowledge. And part of that is, well, he talks about it right here, finding the fault in yourself. It's so easy to blame other people for our feelings, for life circumstances. But Bruno says absolutely not to do that, to find the fault within yourself. So let's reflect on all this. Continue to take in this goodness. So, I've been teaching Bruno Groening's work for a while now. I think I started in 2012. So I've been teaching it for 9 years. And this particular speech and this subject, so most of what Bruno says is very cut and dry. It's very clear. It's really like instructions. As I've often like to say, it's instructions that generally a 5 or a 6-year-old could understand and do. But in this speech, in this topic, there's some mysteries. There's some things that I can't explain, and there maybe are some things that Bruno Groening can't explain because they're just beyond explanation. He can merely point in the direction of them. So, we've talked about, today Bruno talked about taking Christ into us. He talked about that following Christ, that's our path. That's our whole path. He talked about listening to the feeling inside of ourselves and following that. And then when we don't do that, we're not actually living. And I didn't read it today, but last time he talked about that. I'll just read it. This is the hour of the preliminary celebration, meaning before Christmas, is just the hour of reflection. That is, when human beings should reflect firstly on their own being and then on the being of our Savior. Why, for what reason, for what purpose God sent us his Son, who has yet given us so much on our path through life, who is not just anything, but rather everything that we need here for our life on earth. So, some of the things in today's speech I can understand. I can just straightforward say, like listening to your parents and culture over listening to the teachings of Christ or listening to the feeling inside you. I can very clearly say, Bruno Groening said this, and I'm very convinced this is what he meant. And it seems very straightforward. But many of these things are profound mysteries that we've talked about tonight. That God has given us a gift. And expect the gift being Christ. And expects us to take that gift into ourselves. And Bruno talked earlier about the Christmas song that talks about the Christ child returning to earth every year again. And he said, who really believes this? So some of these things are beyond my capacity to explain. I mean, I can do my best, but I think they're actually beyond capacity to explain. And the meaning of the word Savior, Bruno kind of hints at it, gives us some reasons why we could call Christ a Savior or our Savior. And he talked about Christ, this gift, but not just anything, that we also take his gift into ourselves. And then and then the next sentence, he says, and I ask you now, are you not in need of it? Are we not in need of the gift of Christ? So, I could sit here for hours and tell you what I think he means about all of these things, but I don't know that that would really serve or that it's even appropriate, that it's helpful. Because I'm just a human being, and also because some of these things I think are truly beyond language. And I think some of these things are very personal. And we're meant to have an inner knowing of what these words, like I said, living inside out, having our own understanding of what these words mean instead of some guy on the internet being like, this is what Bruno Groening meant. And this material was baffling for me because I've studied and practiced multiple religions. And I've never put one religion over the other, and I still don't. And in the simplest, most non-religious language that I can think of, I think the message of this speech is there is something very, very, very special about Christ's coming and about Christmas Eve. And that specialness is in some mysterious way is also linked to ourselves. Here in this speech, he calls on us to reflect on our being and on the being of Christ. He said it elsewhere that I've read it. But let me just back up and say it again very, very simply. My understanding of this speech and what Bruno's trying to convey here is there's something very uniquely precious, special doesn't even cut it, precious about Jesus and about the Christmas season. Now that sounds religious, and I wasn't open to that. But now I just look at it from a different, like, what if that's just the way things are? Like, what if Bruno is just telling it like it is? Like there's a special energy and there's something special about Jesus. That sounds religious, and many of us have been battered and bruised and harmed with almost the exact same words. Almost. But you can hear the gentleness here. Bruno isn't threatening anyone, like, take Jesus into you or else. It seems to me Bruno is wanting to share this gift with us. And wanting to help us understand just how precious the coming of and possibly the yearly return of Christ. I've said it before and I'll say it many times again. To my knowledge, Bruno never called anyone to become a Christian, but he called everyone to live the path of Christ, to live the way of life that Jesus called us to. So I'll begin to wrap up. Take a short, quiet time. I just want to say thank you to everyone who attended this and everyone who watched this video. This topic is just so special to me. When I found this speech, I felt like I had found a special gift, and I love sharing it. And again, I've read this speech almost every year at Christmas time since, again, I think like for 6 or 7 years, somewhere between 6 and 8 years, who knows. And it's still unfolding for me. So I hope all of you, I've posted a link for it. I hope people take the time to read it for themselves. And let's spend a little time in silence. I think I would add to what I think this speech is all about is live from the inside out, meaning live following that inner feeling, that deep inner feeling, not just the surface feelings, which means being guided by God. And Christ can help us with this, that's the path of Christ, to follow God. And that Christ can help us on that path. Oh, you're very welcome, Pamela. Thank you, Jisoo. Thanks for joining in, Luna. Forever loving everything. So let's take all this good energy. Let's just ask from the bottom of our heart to understand these words, to understand what Christmas is all about and how to celebrate it, to break free of habit and to follow God from the inside out. To draw closer to God, to have a clear understanding of who and what Jesus is. Let's take some time and ask for any personal situations. I'd like to thank, I know I've thanked you already, but again, I'd just like to thank everyone so much for joining in and watching this. And I wish you good reflection on these things. The peace of Christ and following God. We can ask for help with everything. So let's keep asking and keep trusting. And if it's good, it will come. If we ask for something that's good, and by good, I mean in alignment with God's will for us, it will come. And our job is to ask with all our heart and to believe and to ask for help believing. So grateful. Big love. Catch y'all soon.